The wind carried stories across the village of the beast of the north. How it moved like smoke across the peaks, how it appeared at twilight and disappeared before any could see its face clearly. Mothers hushed their children and told them not to wander too far into the snow, for the beast could hear every footstep and see every shadow. Some said its roar shattered ice and sent snow tumbling down the cliffs. Others said its eyes burned like fire, and that it could sense the heart of anyone who dared approach the mountains. Those who had ventured close never returned or came back with faces pale and eyes wide with terror. The elders said it was a spirit of the mountain that had grown angry and wild over centuries, and that only the bravest or the most foolish would ever see it. Alone, the children gathered around the fire, and whispered names for it, calling it the Shadow of the Peaks, the Snow Warden, and the Horned Hunter. They imagined shapes larger than their homes and claws, that scraped the rocks like the grinding of stone against stone. The villagers knew better than to speak too loudly, for the wind carried words farther than they expected, and sometimes at night people swore they heard the crunch of huge paws on frozen ground just beyond the walls of their homes. Traders who passed through said the northern winds brought whispers of danger that seemed almost alive, and that the beast waited in the fog for travelers who ignored the warning signs. The blackened cliffs and frozen rivers were silent witnesses to its roaming, and even the strongest hunters did not linger long after spotting deep tracks in the snow. Their dogs cowered and refused to follow, leaving hunters to turn back with fear in their bones. The mountains themselves seemed to bend around its presence, bending trees and shifting snow, as if making a path for a single unseen force. And yet some could not resist the pull of the legend, for it was not only terror that drew them, but fascination. For in every story of fear there was a spark of something more, a hope that one day someone would meet the beast, not with weapons, but with courage and understanding, and perhaps see the truth behind the eyes that glowed like fire, and the roar that shook the mountains like thunder. Ilara tightened the straps of her pack, and felt the cold bite through her cloak as she stepped into the snowdrifts that stretched toward the mountains. Her breath hung in the air like smoke, and every step sank into powder that crunched beneath her boots. She did not look back at the village. She did not listen to the whispers behind her, for something inside pulled her forward. Something stronger than fear, stronger than reason. Every night she had dreamed of the mountains of the beast of the north, and the amber eyes that glowed like fire through fog. She had imagined the curve of his massive shoulders, the sway of his fur in the wind, and the strange loneliness that seemed to hang around him like a shadow. Her hands shook not from cold but from anticipation, and a thrill she could not name. The path was treacherous ice hidden beneath, snow cliffs that looked solid but could crumble at a touch, and frozen rivers that groaned beneath her weight. But she pressed on. Each step felt heavier than the last, and yet she felt lighter in her heart, as if the closer she came, the freer she became. She remembered the stories of hunters who had fled or never returned, and she shivered, but she did not turn. For hours she climbed winding paths, past jagged rocks, and snow-covered trees that bent under the weight of winter. She saw tracks that were too large to belong to any ordinary animal, and she felt a shiver of recognition, as if the mountain itself was guiding her forward. Her fingers brushed the bark of frozen pines, and she felt the pulse of life around her. The wind carrying whispers through the branches, the snow shifting under unseen weight. She whispered to herself that she was ready, that she would not flee, that she would face whatever waited in the shadows, and perhaps she would be the first to see him, not as a monster but as a being who had waited for someone brave enough to reach him. The mist thickened around Ilara as she climbed higher, jagged rocks cutting into her palms and snow blowing into her eyes, yet she did not stop. Each breath came in sharp bursts, and the wind seemed to whisper her name, daring her to turn back, but she pressed on until she saw it, a shadow moving through the fog, larger than any animal she had ever known. Its fur was dark like the night, and shimmered with frost under the weak sunlight. Her heart skipped a beat, and for a moment she thought it must be a trick of her eyes, or a spirit born from the wind, but it was real. He moved with a terrifying grace over the cliffs and rocks, his muscles rippling beneath thick fur. The ground trembled faintly beneath his weight, and every instinct screamed for her to run. Yet she stood, frozen, her eyes locked on the amber fire in his gaze. He stopped suddenly, as if sensing her presence. His head turned slowly, and his eyes met hers, piercing through the mist and ice. She felt heat and cold at the same time, fear and fascination mingling. In her chest she wanted to speak, but her voice froze on her lips. The beast shifted closer, his movements cautious yet deliberate. Each step left deep impressions in the snow, and each exhalation came out in clouds that mingled with the mist around him. She could see the power in his shoulders, the curve of his claws, the strength that could tear the mountains apart in an instant. And yet in those same eyes she saw something else, something that was not anger or hunger but intelligence and curiosity. The wind stilled as if the world waited for her next move, and she felt the weight of 1,000 stories pressing against her chest. The stories of the villagers, the hunters, the legends, all led to this moment, the moment she would stand before the beast of the north and decide whether fear or courage would shape the rest of her life. Filara felt her knees tremble as the beast of the north studied her from across the snow. He did not move forward yet, he did not retreat either. His amber eyes held a weight that pressed against her chest like the cold itself. She swallowed hard and felt her heartbeat echoing in her ears. The wind seemed to pause around them as if holding its breath. She could see the curve of his massive jaw, the sharpness of his claws, and the way his fur bristled in the cold. Yet beneath the power she sensed something softer, something ancient and waiting. Something that drew her closer even as her body screamed to run. Her hand itched to reach out, but every instinct told her to stay still, to let him decide whether she was worthy of this moment. She took a cautious step forward, and the snow compressed beneath her weight with a hollow sound that made her stomach flip. The beast tilted his head slowly, almost curiously, as if testing her resolve. She stopped and lowered her gaze, not out of fear but to steady herself, to gather courage, to show she meant no harm. The wind shifted and carried the scent of pine and ice, and something else, something wild and untamed that made her chest tighten. She imagined the stories the villagers told, and yet none of them had prepared her for the reality of him, the magnitude of his presence, the strange familiarity she felt as if she had known him in another life. Or in a dream. She whispered to herself that she could do this, that she would not flee, that she would face him fully and see what lay beneath the legend, what lay beneath the eyes that glowed like fire, and the roar that could shake mountains. She raised her head slowly, letting him see her fully, letting him see her courage, letting him decide whether she was friend or pariah. Lara stepped forward slowly, letting the snow crunch softly beneath her boots, each movement measured, careful, deliberate, as if the mountains themselves guided her. The beast of the north watched her without blinking, his amber eyes fixed on hers, piercing through the fog and cold. Her hand hung at her side, trembling slightly from both fear and anticipation. She could feel the power radiating from him, the weight of muscle beneath thick fur, and yet something in the tilt of his head told her he was not immediately hostile. She took another step, feeling the wind whip her hair across her face, and saw his nostrils flare, as if smelling her courage. The air between them felt alive, electric charged, with something neither had named. She froze mid-step, letting the silence stretch longer than her heart thought possible. The world seemed to contract to the space between them, and she whispered to herself that this was the moment that mattered, that whatever came next would change everything, and she raised her hand slowly to see if he would let her touch him. Her fingers trembled as she reached out toward the thick fur of the beast of the north. Every nerve in her body screamed both fear and wonder. She could feel the warmth radiating from him, even through the icy air. Her hand hovered just above the dark fur, and she whispered to herself that this was the moment to trust, that this was the moment to show courage. Slowly she let her fingertips brush against the coarse, thick fur at the edge of his shoulder. The texture was rough, yet warm and alive. Beneath her touch, the beast froze, his massive body rigid, and she felt the tremor of muscle beneath her hand. Her heart pounded so loudly it seemed the mountains themselves could hear it. He sniffed the air around her hand and lowered his massive head slightly, almost as if acknowledging her presence, as if granting permission to continue. She dared to run her fingers along his shoulder, feeling the strength and power coiled beneath the surface like a storm held in fur. She saw the subtle relaxation of his muscles, the way his massive paws shifted slightly in the snow as he adjusted his weight. The wind carried the sound of distant ice cracking, but she no longer noticed. She only noticed him, only noticed the depth of intelligence in his amber eyes that seemed to peer directly into her soul. And then slowly, deliberately, he bent one massive knee to the ground, lowering his head further, until it nearly touched the snow. He did not roar, he did not strike, he only knelt before her in a gesture older than mountains, older than the wind. She froze, her hand still resting on his shoulder, feeling the heat of his body seeping into her own, feeling a connection she could not name, something wild yet gentle, something terrifying yet safe. The world held its breath around them, snow drifting silently through the air, and for a long moment nothing existed beyond the warmth of fur beneath her fingers, and the intelligence and trust reflected in his gaze. She realized then that this was not a beast conquered, not a creature tamed, but a soul meeting. Another soul, a recognition of courage and understanding, a bond formed without words or demands, only acceptance and the quiet, profound trust of one being kneeling before Anna, stayed frozen, her hand resting lightly on the beast of the north, feeling the warmth and life beneath the thick fur. She felt his breath stir the snow around them, soft clouds rising and falling. With each exhale time seemed to stretch and bend, as if the mountains themselves had paused to watch them, two beings from different worlds, yet bound by something older and deeper than fear or reason. She lowered her hand slowly, letting him see her intent, that she meant no harm, and he remained kneeling, steady and patient, as if understanding the weight of her courage. Her heart swelled with a strange mixture of awe and relief, and she realized that this moment was not about taming or conquering, but about recognition, seeing and being seen in a way no one else had ever known. The wind whispered through the peaks, carrying a chill that was softened by the presence of life and connection. She stepped closer, feeling a pull like gravity drawing her to him, and she could see the subtle twitch of his ears, the flick of his tail, the way his massive shoulders shifted with anticipation and calm. She spoke softly, though the words barely mattered, for the bond was in the silence, in the touch, in the shared heartbeat of two souls who had met across worlds. She felt a confidence grow inside her, a certainty that she could trust him, and that he could trust her, and in that certainty the fear that had haunted the mountains for generations began to dissolve, leaving only the quiet, profound understanding of a connection that would not be broken, and a promise unspoken carried on the wind, that wherever she went or he roamed, they had met and seen each other fully, and nothing would ever undo that recognition. Ella led the beast of the north down the narrow mountain paths, each step measured, careful, deliberate, and filled with a trust she had never known. The snow crunched beneath her boots and beneath his massive paws, leaving deep impressions that marked their passage through the silent, frozen world. The wind whipped around them, scattering flakes that danced in the pale light, but neither faltered. She felt the warmth of him beside her, the rise and fall of his powerful chest, the way his eyes constantly watched her as if he would shield her from any hidden danger. The cliffs loomed high on either side and frozen rivers twisted below, yet she never felt fear, only the steady confidence that he would not let her fall, and that she would not leave his side. Every branch that cracked beneath her weight, every sudden gust of wind reminded her of how close they had come to fear, and how much trust now held them together. She spoke softly, sometimes naming the mountains, the peaks, the trees, but mostly she stayed silent, letting him feel her presence, and letting herself feel his presence. She could see the villagers watching from afar as they approached the edge of the forest, their eyes wide with disbelief and awe. They had never seen such a sight, a woman walking alongside the beast of the north, moving as one through snow and ice, like the mountains themselves had chosen her to tame the legend without weapons or threats. The bond between them radiated a quiet power that changed the fear in the villagers' hearts into reverence and curiosity. She realized that this journey had already rewritten the stories that had haunted the peaks for generations, and that the trust forged in silence and snow would carry beyond the mountains, beyond the village, into the hearts of anyone who would hear the tale of the woman and the beast of the north. Villagers gathered around their fires, whispering among themselves of what they had seen, the woman walking beside the beast of the north, moving through snow and ice with a quiet confidence and a bond no one had thought possible. They watched as he lowered his massive head and nudged her gently with a paw, as if acknowledging her courage. And they felt a shift in the air, a change in the fear that had gripped them for generations. Alara stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder, and she felt the pulse of life beneath her fingers, the warmth and strength that was not meant to be controlled but shared. The mountains loomed behind them, silent witnesses to a story that had begun with whispers and ended with trust. The villagers began to tell a new tale of the beast of the north, a tale not of terror but of understanding, not of conquest but of connection. They spoke of a woman brave enough to walk into the snow and meet the eyes of a legend, and of a beast strong enough to kneel and offer trust. They told of the mountains and the snow and the silence that had carried a bond older than fear, older than time, and of the warmth that could exist even in the coldest of places. Children listened, wide-eyed, imagining the amber fire in his eyes and the courage that shone in hers. The fires burned brighter that night, and the wind carried a story of hope and courage across the peaks and valleys, and even in the darkest corners of the north, people whispered not of the monster that roamed but of the moment when two souls met and recognized each other, when a single touch could awaken trust and loyalty, and when the legend of fear became a legend of wonder, and the beast of the north was no longer a shadow in the mountains, but a guardian, a friend, and a symbol of what could be achieved when hearts met without words and without demand.